Sarah Martinez wiped down the last table in the community center's dining hall. The smell of bleach filled her nose as she worked. She had been doing this job for 3 years now. Every day was the same: clean tables, mop floors, stack chairs. Go home to her small apartment. The clock on the wall showed 2:30 p.m. In 30 minutes, she could leave. Sarah looked forward to getting home. Her feet hurt from standing all day. Her back ached from bending over tables. But the job paid her. Bills? That was what mattered. Sarah, can I talk to you for a minute? She turned around. Mrs. Johnson stood behind her. Mrs. Johnson ran the music program at the center. She was a kind woman with gray hair and soft eyes. Sarah had seen her many times, but they rarely spoke. Sure, Sarah said. She put down her cleaning cloth. Mrs. Johnson looked worried. Her hands moved nervously. We have a problem tonight. A big problem. Sarah waited. She did not know what this had to do with her. We have a memorial service at 7 o'clock, Mrs. Johnson said, for Elena Rodriguez. She was a piano teacher in this neighborhood for many years, a wonderful woman. Sarah nodded. She had heard about Mrs. Rodriguez. Everyone in the area knew her. She taught music to children who could not afford lessons. Our regular piano player is sick, Mrs. Johnson continued. Very sick. She cannot come tonight. We need someone to play just one song, just Amazing Grace, nothing fancy, just simple. Sarah's heart started beating faster. I don't understand. Why are you telling me this? Mrs. Johnson stepped closer. Maria in the kitchen told me something. She said she once heard you humming at work. She said you knew all the words to classical music songs. She thought maybe you played piano. Sarah felt her face get hot. She looked down at the floor. That was a long time ago. So you do play? The question hung in the air. Sarah thought about lying. It would be easier. But Mrs. Johnson looked so desperate. I used to, Sarah said quietly. When I was young, but I haven't played in years, many years. Mrs. Johnson's face lit up. Oh, thank goodness. Would you help? U.S., it's just one song, Amazing Grace. Everyone knows it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Sarah shook her head quickly. No, I can't. I really can't. You don't understand. I haven't touched a piano in over 10 years. Please, Mrs. Johnson said. The family is counting on us. Elena was so important to this community. We can't have a service without music. She loved music more than anything. Sarah felt trapped. She wanted to help. But the thought of playing piano in front of people scared her. What if she forgot how? What if her fingers didn't work right? What if she embarrassed herself? I'm not good. Enough, Sarah said. You need someone better. Mrs. Johnson put her hand on Sarah's arm. There is no one else. I've called everyone I know. You're our only hope. Sarah thought about her childhood. She remembered sitting at the old piano in her family's living room. Her mother saved money. For months to buy that piano, it was used and some keys stuck. But Sarah loved it. She remembered her piano teacher, Mr. Chun. He was strict but kind. He made her practice scales every day. He taught her classical pieces. He said she had talent. Real talent? She remembered the day everything changed. She was 17. Her family lost their house. They had to sell everything, including the piano. Sarah watched the men carry it away. She cried for days. After that, there was no money for lessons, no piano to practice on. Sarah had to get a job to help her family. She worked in restaurants. She cleaned houses. She did whatever she could find. College became impossible. Music school was just a dream. Sarah told herself it didn't matter. Music was for rich kids anyway. Not for girls like her, but sometimes late at night her fingers still moved like she was playing piano. Sometimes she heard melodies in her head. Sometimes she missed it so much it hurt. Sarah? Mrs. Johnson's voice brought her back to the present. I don't know, Sarah said. What if I mess up? What if I can't remember how to play? Then you mess up, Mrs. Johnson said with a smile. It's okay. People will understand. They'll be grateful you tried. Sarah looked around the dining hall. She saw the old piano in the corner. It was covered with papers and boxes. No one used it anymore. It looked lonely. "Can I see the piano first?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Johnson's face brightened. "Of course. Let's go look at it." They walked over to the piano. Mrs. Johnson moved the papers and boxes. The piano was old but clean. Someone had been taking care of it. Sarah sat down on the bench. She lifted the cover over the keys. They were yellow with age, but straight. She pressed middle C. The sound was clear and true. Her hands shook as she placed them on the keys. She tried to remember the position Mr. Chun taught her. Curved fingers, straight wrists. "Relax your shoulders." She played a simple scale, C major. The notes came out clear. Her fingers remembered better than her mind did. "You sound wonderful," Mrs. Johnson said. Sarah played a few more notes. Then she stopped. "I'm very rusty. I make mistakes." "Everyone makes mistakes," Mrs. Johnson said. "Music is about heart, not perfection." Sarah thought about Mrs. Rodriguez. She had never met her, but she knew the stories. Mrs. Rodriguez taught children for free. She gave them hope. She changed lives through music. Maybe Sarah could do this one small thing, just one song, for a woman who had given so much to others. "Okay," Sarah said softly. "I'll try, but I can't promise it will be good." Mrs. Johnson hugged her. "Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. You're saving us." As Mrs. Johnson walked away, Sarah stayed at the piano. She played Amazing Grace slowly. Her fingers stumbled in a few places, but the melody was there. It was still inside her. She wondered if she was making a huge mistake, but it was too late now. She had said yes, tonight she would play piano again. After all these years of silence, she would make music. The thought terrified her and excited her at the same time. Sarah closed the piano cover. She had 4 hours to get ready. 4 hours to remember how to be a musician again. Sarah went home after work but could not sit still. She paced around her small apartment. Her hands felt cold and shaky. Every few minutes she looked at the clock. The memorial service was getting closer. She tried to eat dinner, but her stomach felt sick. She made tea, but it tasted like nothing. All she could think about was the piano and the people who would be watching her play. At 5 o'clock, Sarah went back to the community center. The building was quiet. Most people had gone home. Sarah had her own key because she sometimes worked late. She walked to the main hall where the piano sat. Someone had moved more things off of it. Fresh flowers sat on top. Chairs were arranged in rows facing the piano. Everything was ready for the service. Sarah sat down at the piano bench. She opened the cover and looked at the keys. In the afternoon light, they looked different. More serious somehow. She put her hands in position and started to play Amazing Grace. Her fingers found the right keys, but the music sounded stiff, mechanical, like a music box that needed oil. Sarah stopped and shook her hands. She tried again. This time she played slower. She tried to remember how Mr. Chun taught her to make music flow like water. But her hands felt clumsy. They had forgotten how to be gentle. For 10 years, these hands had only scrubbed and cleaned and carried heavy things. They had forgotten how to touch piano keys with love. Sarah played the song 5 times. Each time was a little better, but it still didn't sound right. It sounded like someone learning to play, not like someone who used to dream of being a real musician. She stopped playing and put her head in her hands. What was she thinking? She couldn't do this. Not in front of people. Not at a memorial service for someone important. Sarah remembered the last time she had played piano for other people. She was 17. It was her high school talent show. She played a piece by Chopin. It was difficult and beautiful. She had practiced for months. That night she played perfectly. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Her piano teacher was so proud. Her parents cried happy tears. Everyone said she would go to music school. Everyone said she would be famous. Someday. 2 weeks later, her father lost his job. A month after that, they lost their house. Sarah's dreams of music school disappeared like smoke. She never played in public again. She couldn't bear to. It hurt too much to remember what she had lost. Now, sitting in the empty community center, all those old feelings came back. The sadness. The anger. The sense that life was unfair. Sarah stood up from the piano bench. She should leave now. She should call Mrs. Johnson and say she couldn't do it. They would find someone else. Or maybe they would have the service without music. But as she started to walk away, she saw something on the piano. A small framed photo that wasn't there before. She picked it up and looked at it closely. The photo showed an elderly woman sitting. At a piano, she was surrounded by children of all ages. Some were very young, maybe 5 or 6. Others looked like teenagers. All of them were smiling. The woman in the photo had kind eyes and a gentle smile. Her hands rested on the piano keys like they belonged there. This had to be Elena Rodriguez. Sarah studied the faces of the children. They looked happy. Not just happy to be in a photo, but really happy. Like they had found something special. Sarah turned the photo over. Someone had written on the back in careful handwriting, Mrs. Rodriguez and her students, 2018. Music is love made audible. Sarah read the words again. Music is love made audible. She had never heard that saying before, but it felt true. She looked at the photo again. These children probably didn't have much money. Their families probably struggled like Sarah's family had. But Mrs. Rodriguez had given them something precious. She had given them music. Sarah thought about Mrs. Rodriguez spending her own money on sheet music, staying late to give free lessons, opening her heart to children who needed hope. She thought about the woman's funeral tonight. Her family would be there. Her students would be there, now grown up. They would remember how she changed their lives, and Sarah was supposed to play one simple song to honor this woman. Just Amazing Grace. That was all. Sarah sat back down at the piano. She looked at the photo of Mrs. Rodriguez and her students. Then she placed her hands on the keys again. This time, she didn't think about her own fears. She didn't think about the mistakes she might make. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez. She thought about love made audible. She played Amazing Grace again. It still wasn't perfect, but something was different. The notes had more feeling. They seemed to mean something. Sarah played the song 10 more times. With each repetition, she felt more connected to the music. She started to remember why she had loved piano so much as a child. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about being famous. It was about taking feelings that were too big for words and turning them into something beautiful. As the sun set outside, Sarah continued to practice. The hall grew darker, but she didn't turn on the lights. She liked the quiet dimness. It felt peaceful. She played other songs too. Old songs she remembered from childhood. Hymns her grandmother used to sing, classical pieces she had learned long ago. Her fingers slowly remembered how to move with grace. At 6:30, Sarah heard cars pulling into the parking lot. People were arriving for the service. Her peaceful practice time was over. Sarah closed the piano cover and stood up. Her hands still shook a little, but not as much as before. She felt ready. Not confident, but ready. She walked to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. She was wearing her best dress, a simple blue one she had bought for job interviews. Her hair was neat. She looked respectable, but in her eyes she saw something she hadn't seen in years. A spark of the girl who used to dream of playing piano on big stages. The girl who believed music could change the world. Tonight, she wouldn't be playing on a big stage. She wouldn't change the world. But maybe, just maybe, she could honor one woman who had made the world a little better. Sarah took a deep breath and walked back toward the main hall. Through the doors, she could see people taking their seats. It was time. People filled the community center hall slowly and quietly. Sarah watched from the side door as families found their seats. Old people walked carefully with canes. Middle-aged adults helped elderly parents sit down. Young children stayed close to their mothers and fathers. Everyone dressed modestly. Men wore dark suits or their best shirts. Women wore dresses or nice pants. Even the children were dressed up. This was important to them. This was someone they all loved. Sarah recognized some faces from the neighborhood. She had seen them at the grocery store or walking down the street. But tonight they looked different, sadder, more serious. A family sat in the front row. Sarah could tell they were Mrs. Rodriguez's relatives. They had the same kind eyes she had seen in the photo. An older man sat next to a woman who looked about 50. Next to her was a young woman, maybe 25, holding a baby. The young woman kept touching a tissue to her eyes. The baby was quiet, as if sensing that this was a solemn time. The older man held the 50-year-old woman's hand. More people came in. Sarah was surprised by how many there were. The hall was getting full. These were not just family members. These were people whose lives Mrs. Rodriguez had touched. An elderly man walked in using a walker. A teenage boy helped him to a seat. Sarah heard the boy say, "She taught me piano when I was 7, Grandpa. I never forgot." A woman with gray hair came in with her adult daughter. "I was so shy as a child," the woman said. Mrs. Rodriguez neighed. "Me feel brave," she said. "Music would give me confidence." She was right. 2 men in their 30s sat together near the back. One said to the other, "Remember how she never got angry when we messed up? She just said, 'Try again, Mio.'" Music is patient. Sarah listened to these conversations and felt her chest get tight. These people weren't just coming to a funeral. They were coming to say goodbye to someone who had changed their lives. She thought about her own piano teacher. Mr. Chun, he had been kind too. But he was just doing his job. Mrs. Rodriguez was different. She had chosen to give her whole life to music and children. At 6:45, Mrs. Johnson came over to Sarah. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Nervous," Sarah said honestly. "That's normal," Mrs. Johnson said. "Look at all these people. They're here because Elena made their lives better through music. Tonight you're continuing her work." Sarah hadn't thought of it that way. She was just trying to play one song without making mistakes, but Mrs. Johnson was right. In a way, she was carrying on Mrs. Rodriguez's love of music. "When should I play?" Sarah asked. "After the family speaks," Mrs. Johnson said. "There will be some readings and memories first. Then Elena's granddaughter wants to say something. After that, we'll have the music." Sarah nodded. She watched as the granddaughter got up and walked to the front of the room. This was the young woman with the baby. Up close, Sarah could see she had been crying. "Thank you all for coming," the granddaughter said. Her voice was soft but clear. "My name is Maria. Elena Rodriguez was my grandmother." The room became completely quiet. Even the baby stopped making little noises. "My grandmother taught piano for 47 years, Maria continued. "She never charged money if families couldn't pay. She used her own money to buy sheet music and fix broken piano keys. She said music was like food. Everyone deserved to have it." People nodded, some wiped their eyes. "Abuela had sayings about music," Maria said with a small smile. Her favorite was "Music is love made audible." She said when you play from your heart, people can hear the love. Sarah felt a chill run down her back. Those were the same words written on the photo. She also said that music doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful, Maria continued. She said mistakes are just places where the music becomes more human. Sarah gripped her hands together. Mrs. Rodriguez understood that music was about more than technical skill. She understood that it was about connecting hearts. "My grandmother taught hundreds of children," Maria said. "Some became professional musicians, others just learned to love music. She was proud of all of them equally." Maria paused and looked around the room. "She taught me that every person has music inside them. Sometimes it just needs someone to help bring it out." An older woman in the third row stood up. "May I say something?" Maria nodded. "Elena taught my son piano 30 years ago," the woman sighed. "He was having trouble in school. Kids made fun of him because he was different. But Elena saw something special in him. Music gave him confidence. Now he's a music teacher himself in another city. He couldn't be here tonight, but he wanted me to say thank you." Another person stood up, then another. One by one, people shared stories about Mrs. Rodriguez, how she had helped their children, how she had made them feel important, how she had shown them that music could heal sadness and bring joy. Sarah listened to every story. With each one, she understood more about The woman she was honoring tonight, Mrs. Rodriguez, wasn't just a piano teacher. She was someone who believed that every person deserved beauty in their life. A man with a gray beard stood up near the back. Elena didn't just teach music, he said. She taught us about generosity, about seeing the best in people, about using our gifts to help others. Sarah thought about her own gifts. She had been blessed with musical ability as a child. But when life got hard, she had hidden that gift away. She had convinced herself it didn't matter anymore, but sitting here, listening to these stories, Sarah began to see things differently. Maybe her musical gift wasn't gone. Maybe it was just sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up. Elena always said that music never really dies, Maria said as the sharing came to an end. She said it lives on in the people who carry it forward. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. She was about to play piano for all these people who had loved Mrs. Rodriguez. She was about to use her gift to honor someone who had used her gift to help others. The weight of that responsibility felt heavy. But it also felt right. Maria looked toward the piano, then at Sarah. It was time. Sarah stood up on shaky legs. Every eye in the room turned toward her. She had never felt so nervous and so honored at the same time. She walked slowly to the piano bench. Her heart was beating so fast she wondered if people could hear it. She sat down and looked out at the crowd. These weren't strangers anymore. These were people who understood the power of music. People who knew that music could speak when words weren't enough. Sarah placed her hands on the piano keys. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez and her 47 years of teaching. She thought about love made audible. She thought about music that doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. She took a deep breath and began to play. Sarah's hands rested on the piano keys, but she had not started playing yet. The room was completely silent. She could feel everyone waiting, watching her. Just as she was about to begin, Maria spoke again from the front of the room. Before the music starts, Maria said, I want to share one more story about my grandmother. It's about what music really means. Sarah's hands stayed on the keys as she listened. When I was 12, I was taking piano lessons from Abuela, Maria began. I was not very good. I made mistakes all the time. I got frustrated and wanted to quit. Sarah could relate to this feeling. She remembered her own struggles as a young student. One day I was crying because I couldn't play a piece correctly, Maria continued. Every time I tried, I hit the wrong notes. I told Abuela I was stupid and would never be a real musician. The room was perfectly quiet. Even the baby was still. Abuela sat down next to me on the piano bench, Maria said. She told me something I will never forget. She said, Mia, music isn't about perfect technique. Music is about perfect heart. When you play with love, people feel that love. When you play with sadness, people feel that sadness. The notes are just the language. The feeling is the message. Sarah felt her chest tighten. These words spoke directly to her fear. She had been so worried about playing the notes correctly. But Mrs. Rodriguez understood that music was about much more than that. Then Abuela said something else, Maria continued. She said, the most beautiful music often comes from people who have known struggle. Their hearts have more to say. She told me that my mistakes were not failures. They were just part of learning to speak with my heart. Sarah thought about her own struggles, losing her family's home, giving up her dreams of music school, working cleaning jobs for years. Maybe all of that pain had something to teach her about music. Abuela always looked for the heart in music, Maria said. She didn't care if her students became famous. She cared that they learned to express their feelings. She said that music was a gift we give to each other. Maria looked directly at Sarah. Tonight we have someone who is giving us that gift. Someone who hasn't played piano in public for many years. But she said yes when we needed her. That takes courage. That takes heart. Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. Maria was talking about her. This family was grateful to her, even though they didn't know anything about her background. Abuela used to say that sometimes the most powerful music comes from unexpected places, Maria continued. From people who thought their music was gone forever. She believed that music always finds a way back to us when we need it most. Sarah looked at the photograph of Mrs. Rodriguez on top of the piano. The elderly woman's kind eyes seemed to be looking right at her. Sarah felt like Mrs. Rodriguez was somehow present in the room, encouraging her. "My grandmother's favorite version of Amazing Grace was never the perfect one," Maria said. "Her favorite was the one played by her student who was so nervous." Her hands shook. That student played with so much heart that everyone in the room cried. Abuela said it was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. Sarah realized that Maria was telling her it was okay to be nervous. It was okay if her hands shook. What mattered was that she was trying to honor Mrs. Rodriguez with sincerity. "So, tonight, as we listen to this music, let's remember Abuela's words," Maria said. "Music isn't about perfect technique. It's about perfect heart." Maria sat down next to her family. The room became quiet again. But now the silence felt different to Sarah. It felt welcoming instead of threatening. Sarah looked out at the faces in the audience. She saw the teenage boy who had helped his grandfather find a seat. She saw the woman whose shy child had found confidence through music. She saw the families whose lives had been changed by Mrs. Rodriguez's generosity. These people understood struggle. They understood that life could be hard and unfair. They also understood that music could offer comfort and hope in dark times. Sarah thought about her own dark times. The night her family lost their house. The day she realized she would never go to music school. All the years she spent believing her musical dreams were foolish, but maybe those experiences had taught her something valuable. Maybe they had given her heart something to say through music. Sarah remembered what Mr. Chun used to tell her. "Don't just play the notes, Sarah. Tell a story with them." Tonight she had a story to tell. It was a story about dreams that seemed lost but weren't really gone. It was a story about second chances and unexpected opportunities. It was a story about how one person's kindness could inspire another person to be brave. Sarah placed her fingers on the keys in the proper position. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez teaching hundreds of children over 47 years. She thought about the woman's belief that everyone deserved to have music in their life. She thought about Maria's words, "Music is love made audible." Sarah took a deep breath. She wasn't going to play Amazing Grace just as a song anymore. She was going to play it as a prayer. A thank you to a woman who had spent her life serving others through music. She was going to play it as a promise, too. A promise that Mrs. Rodriguez's belief in the power of music would continue, that her legacy of kindness and generosity would live on. Sarah's hands were still nervous, but her heart felt calm. She understood now what she was really doing. She wasn't just playing a song at a memorial service. She was continuing a conversation about love and music that Mrs. Rodriguez had started decades ago. The first note came out clear and true. Sarah smiled slightly as she began to play. She wasn't playing for the audience anymore. She was playing for Mrs. Rodriguez. She was playing for all the children whose lives had been changed by music. She was playing for her own younger self, who had never stopped believing that music mattered. Most of all, she was playing from her heart, just like Mrs. Rodriguez had taught her students to do. The first notes of Amazing Grace filled the quiet hall. Sarah's fingers moved carefully across the keys. She played the melody exactly as Mrs. Johnson had asked, simple, clean, respectful. The familiar tune floated through the room. People sat very still, listening. Some closed their eyes. Others looked at the photograph of Mrs. Rodriguez on the piano. Sarah focused on playing each note correctly. She had practiced this version many times in the past hour. Her fingers remembered where to go. The melody was steady and clear. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. She played the first line slowly. Each note was deliberate. She wanted to honor the solemnity of the moment. Sarah could feel the audience listening carefully. She heard someone sigh softly. Another person shifted in their chair. But mostly there was just the music and the quiet breathing of people paying their respects. This was what Mrs. Johnson had wanted. A simple, beautiful version of a beloved hymn. Nothing fancy. Nothing that would take attention away from the memory of Mrs. Rodriguez. As Sarah played the second line of the melody, she thought about how many times this song had been played at funerals, how many times it had offered comfort to people who were grieving. There was something powerful about playing music that had touched so many hearts over the years. That saved a wretch like me, the melody continued. Sarah's left hand added simple bass notes. Just the basic chords she remembered from her childhood lessons. The harmony was clean and traditional. She glanced up briefly at the audience. Many people had tears in their eyes. Not because her playing was extraordinary, but because the song itself carried so much meaning. It spoke of forgiveness and redemption, of hope in dark times. Sarah felt honored to be part of this moment, to be the one providing the musical backdrop for these people's grief and remembrance. I once was lost, but now am found. The melody moved through this familiar line. Sarah had always loved these words. They spoke to something deep in the human experience. The feeling of being lost. The joy of being found. As she played, Sarah began to think about Mrs. Rodriguez. She imagined the woman sitting at her own piano, teaching children these same chords, showing them how to make their fingers work together to create harmony. The music felt like a bridge connecting Sarah to Mrs. Rodriguez. Even though they had never met, they shared this love of piano. This understanding that music could speak when words were not enough. Was blind, but now I see. Sarah played this line with special care. She thought about all the children Mrs. Rodriguez had taught to see music, to understand that they had beauty inside them waiting to come out. The simple version of the song was working exactly as it should. It was providing a peaceful moment for reflection. It was honoring Mrs. Rodriguez without calling attention to itself, but as Sarah continued playing, something began to shift inside her. The melody that had felt mechanical at first was starting to feel more personal, more connected to her own story. She thought about her own experience of being lost and found. How music had been such an important part of her young life. How losing it had felt like losing a piece of herself. How sitting at this piano tonight was like finding that piece again. The bass notes in her left hand began to have more expression. Not louder, but warmer, more alive. Sarah wasn't trying to show off. She was just allowing herself to feel the music more deeply. Through many dangers, toils, and snares I have already come. This verse always made Sarah think of life's difficulties. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's struggles too. Teaching music probably wasn't easy, dealing with families who couldn't pay, buying supplies with her own money, but Mrs. Rodriguez had kept going. She had found a way to bring music to children who needed it. She had turned her love of piano into a gift for her whole community. Sarah's right hand began to add small decorations to the melody, just tiny flourishes that made the simple tune more interesting. Nothing that changed the basic song, but small touches that showed her own musical personality. She was still playing respectfully, still honoring the request for something simple. But the music was becoming more alive, more personal. "'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." These words felt especially meaningful tonight. Sarah thought about the grace that had brought her to this piano bench. The unexpected invitation from Mrs. Johnson, the courage to say yes despite her fears. Maybe this was Mrs. Rodriguez's grace too. Maybe the woman's spirit was somehow guiding Sarah's fingers tonight, helping her remember that music was about more than just correct notes. The audience seemed to sense the subtle change in the music. People were listening more intently. The energy in the room was shifting from polite attention to deeper engagement. Sarah wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. She was just allowing herself to connect more fully with the music, to let her own story of loss and rediscovery flow through the familiar melody. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun. This verse looked toward the future, toward hope, toward the idea that beautiful things last forever. Sarah thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's legacy, how her influence would continue through all the students she had taught, how her belief in the power of music would keep spreading to new generations. As Sarah played these words, Her left hand began to create a richer harmony. Still simple, but with more depth. More emotional color. The music was growing organically, naturally. She wasn't trying to change the song. She was just letting it speak more fully. Letting it carry more of the love and gratitude that filled the room. We've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. The final verse of the traditional version. Sarah played it with growing confidence and feeling, but as she reached the end of the song, she realized she didn't want to stop yet. The music felt like it had more to say. More healing to offer. Without planning it, Sarah began to play the melody again. But this time, her heart was fully engaged. This time, the simple tune was becoming something deeper. As Sarah began playing Amazing Grace for the second time, something inside her opened up. The notes were the same, but they carried different feelings now. Deeper feelings. Her left hand found richer chords that she didn't remember learning. They came from somewhere inside her, like muscle memory that went beyond technique. The bass notes created a foundation that felt solid and warm. Sarah's right hand began to explore small variations in the melody. Not big changes, but subtle shifts that made the familiar tune feel fresh. Like hearing an old story told by someone who truly understood its meaning. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's 47 years of teaching. How many times had this woman played simple songs and made them beautiful? How many children had heard her play and thought, I want to make music like that? The melody flowed more freely now. Sarah's fingers remembered skills she thought she had lost. Ways of connecting notes smoothly. Ways of making phrases breathe like natural speech. In the audience, people were responding to the change in the music. They sat forward slightly. Their attention became more focused. The energy in the room grew warmer. Sarah wasn't showing off. She was simply allowing herself to be more present with the music. To let her own story blend with the story of the song. She thought about her teenage self, playing Chopin at the talent show. How confident she had felt then. How sure she was. That music would be her life's work. That version of herself felt very far away now, but also somehow very close. As she played Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. For the second time, Sarah let the melody linger on certain notes. She created small spaces of silence that made the next notes more meaningful. Her hands were no longer shaking. They felt steady and sure. This was what she was meant to be doing. This was what her hands were made for. Sarah began to hear harmonies in her head that weren't on the page. Inner voices that could weave around the main melody. Without thinking too much about it, she started to add these voices with her right hand. The music became richer, more complex, but not complicated. It was like a conversation where multiple people were speaking, but they all understood each other perfectly. That saved a wretch like me. As Sarah played these words, she thought about salvation not just in a religious sense, but in a human sense. Being saved from despair. Being saved from believing you have nothing valuable to offer. Mrs. Rodriguez had saved hundreds of children in this way. She had shown them that they mattered, that their voices deserved to be heard. That music was not just for the wealthy or the specially talented. Sarah's playing became more expressive. She allowed the volume to rise and fall like natural breathing. Some phrases were soft and tender. Others were stronger and more confident. She could feel the audience responding. Someone made a small sound of appreciation. Another person reached for a tissue. The baby, who had been quiet before, made a soft cooing sound, as if the music was speaking to him too. I once was lost, but now am found. These words took on new meaning as Sarah played them. She thought about her own journey from that confident teenager to the scared cleaning woman who had almost said no to this opportunity, but here she was, found again. Not in the same way as before, but in a new way. A way that included all her struggles and disappointments. A way that was deeper because of what she had lost and learned. Sarah's left hand began to create a walking bass line. Notes that moved smoothly from one chord to the next, creating a sense of journey, of movement toward something better. She realized she was improvising now. Not playing from memory or from sheet music, but creating music in real time. This was something she had never been able to do as a young student. It required not just technical skill but trust in herself and in the music. Was blind, but now I see. Sarah played this phrase with special tenderness. She thought about all the times in her life when she had been blind to her own worth. When she had believed that her dreams were foolish. When she had forgotten that she had gifts to offer the world. The music was teaching her something as she played it. It was showing her that her musical ability hadn't disappeared during those 10 years of silence. It had been growing in different ways, learning from life experience. Gaining depth and emotional maturity. In the audience, an elderly man closed his eyes and swayed slightly with the music. A middle-aged woman put her hand over her heart. Maria, Mrs. Rodriguez's granddaughter, was crying. But she was also smiling. Sarah felt a connection to Mrs. Rodriguez that went beyond words. Through the music, she could sense the older woman's spirit, her generous heart. Her belief that music was meant to be shared, not hoarded. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, Sarah's playing became more dramatic here. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's challenges as a teacher, the families who couldn't pay, the children who struggled. The society that didn't always value what she was doing, but also Sarah's own dangers and snares. The poverty that ended her music education. The years of believing she wasn't good enough. The fear that had almost kept her from sitting at this piano tonight. Her right hand found a harmony line that seemed to answer the melody. Like two voices singing together. Like Mrs. Rodriguez and Sarah having a conversation across time. I have already come? Sarah played these words with growing strength. She had come through her own struggles. She had survived. She was here, making music again, honoring someone who had dedicated her life to helping others find their voices. The simple hymn was becoming something bigger now. Not because Sarah was trying to impress anyone, but because she was allowing it to carry the full weight of everything she was feeling. The music was becoming a bridge between her past and her future. Between the girl who had lost everything and the woman who was discovering she still had something valuable to give. As she moved into the final verse, Sarah knew something important was happening. Not just for her, but for everyone in the room. The music was creating a space where grief and hope could exist together, where endings and beginnings could touch. Sarah reached the final verse of Amazing Grace and knew this was the moment that mattered most. Everything had been building to this. All the emotion in the room, all the love from Mrs. Rodriguez, all of Sarah's own journey back to music. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun. Sarah played these words with everything she had learned about hope and persistence. About not giving up even when life seems impossible. Her hands moved across the keys with complete confidence now. She wasn't thinking about technique anymore. She wasn't worried about making mistakes. She was simply telling a story with music, and the story was bigger than any individual notes. The melody soared higher than it had before. Sarah's right hand found notes in the upper register of the piano that sparkled like stars. Her left hand provided a foundation that felt as solid as bedrock. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez shining like the sun for 47 years, bringing light to children who needed it. Never giving up on anyone. Never deciding that someone was too poor or too difficult to deserve music. In the audience, people were completely absorbed in the music. No one was looking at their phones or checking the time. They were all present in this moment, connected. By the sounds flowing from the old piano. Sarah could feel their attention like warmth on her skin. Not judgment or criticism, but appreciation and understanding. These people knew what it meant to struggle. They knew what it meant to be given a chance by someone who believed in you. We've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Sarah played this line with a sense of eternity, of things that last forever, of love that doesn't die even when people do. But as she played these words, Sarah realized she couldn't end the song in the usual way. There was too much feeling that hadn't been expressed yet. Too much gratitude that needed to be shared. Without planning it, Sarah began to improvise an extended ending. Her right hand created a melody that danced around the original tune, higher notes that seemed to reach toward heaven. lower notes that honored the earth and the people still living on it. Her left hand found chord progressions that moved like a prayer, like someone talking to God about loss and love, and the mystery of how beautiful things can come from painful experiences. The music became very personal now. Sarah wasn't just playing for the audience anymore. She was playing for her 17-year-old self who had to watch the piano being carried away. She was playing for all the years when she thought music was gone from her life forever. She was playing for her mother, who had saved money for piano lessons even when they could barely afford food. For Mr. Chun, who had believed in her talent. For every dream that had seemed lost but wasn't really gone. Tears began to flow down Sarah's cheeks, but she kept playing. The tears felt good. They felt like a release of everything she had been holding inside for 10 years. In the audience, people were crying too. Not just sad tears for Mrs. Rodriguez, but tears of recognition. They heard their own stories in the music, their own struggles and hopes and moments of unexpected grace. The teenage boy who had helped his grandfather to a seat was crying because he remembered how music had saved him from loneliness. The woman with gray hair was crying because she remembered finding confidence at Mrs. Rodriguez's piano bench. Maria was crying because she could hear her grandmother's spirit in the music. The same generosity, the same belief that every person carries something beautiful inside them. Sarah's playing became even more expressive. Her whole body was involved now. Her shoulders moved with the rhythm. Her breathing matched the phrases of the music. She found herself playing melodies she had never heard before. They came from deep inside her, from places that had been silent for years. It was like discovering rooms in her own heart that she had forgotten existed. The music spoke of resurrection. Not just spiritual resurrection, but the resurrection of dreams, of talents that seem dead but are only sleeping. Of second chances and unexpected opportunities. Sarah played phrases that climbed higher and higher, reaching for something beyond ordinary experience. The piano seemed to have more notes than usual. The sound seemed to fill not just the room, but the whole world. She thought about all the children Mrs. Rodriguez had taught, how they were scattered now across the country, living their lives, but carrying her influence with them. How music creates connections that never really break. The improvised melody began to quote other songs, fragments of classical pieces Sarah had learned as a child, bits of folk songs and lullabies, all woven together into something new but familiar. It was as if all the music Sarah had ever known was coming together in this moment. All the songs that had shaped her, all the beauty she had absorbed over the years. Even when she thought she wasn't a musician anymore, the music grew to a powerful climax. Not loud in a harsh way, but full and rich and completely alive. Sarah's hands moved across the entire keyboard, creating layers of sound that seemed impossible for just 10 fingers. Then, gradually, the music began to quiet down. Like a storm moving away. Like the sun setting after a perfect day. Sarah played the main melody of Amazing Grace one more time. But very simply now. Very gently. Like a parent singing a lullaby to a child who is falling asleep. The final notes hung in the air for a long moment. Sarah's hands remained on the keys even after the sound had faded. She wasn't ready to break the spell that had been created. The silence that followed was unlike any silence Sarah had ever experienced. It felt sacred, full of presence rather than absence. Then, slowly, the sound of quiet weeping began to fill the room. The silence after Sarah's playing felt like a prayer that everyone was saying together without words. People sat perfectly still, not wanting to break the spell that had fallen over the room. Sarah kept her hands on the piano keys for a few more seconds. She could feel the vibrations from the last notes still humming in the wood of the old instrument. Her heart was beating fast, but she felt calm in a way she hadn't felt in years. Slowly, she lifted her hands and folded them in her lap. She looked out at the audience for the first time since she had started playing. What she saw took her breath away. Nearly everyone in the room was crying. Not the polite tears of a funeral, but deep, healing tears. Tears that seemed to come from a place of recognition and gratitude. The elderly man with the walker had his hand over his heart. His granddaughter was rubbing his back gently. The woman with gray hair was holding her adult daughter's hand. Maria was crying and smiling at the same time, holding her baby close. For a long moment, no one moved. The music had created a space that felt sacred, and no one wanted to be the first to speak and break it. Finally, Maria stood up. She walked slowly to the piano, still holding her baby. When she reached Sarah, she didn't say anything at first. She just looked at her with eyes full of tears and gratitude. "That was my grandmother," Maria whispered. "That was exactly who she was. How did you know?" Sarah didn't know how to answer. She had never met Mrs. Rodriguez, but somehow, through the music, she had felt the woman's spirit, her generosity, her belief that music could heal and connect and transform. "I could feel her," Sarah said quietly, "through the piano, through the stories everyone shared." Maria reached out and hugged Sarah, careful not to squish the baby between them. "Thank you," she whispered. "That wasn't just music. That was love made audible. Just like Abuela always said." Other people began to approach the piano. The elderly man with the walker moved slowly toward them, supported by his grandson. "Young lady," he said to Sarah, his voice shaky with emotion, "I've been to many memorial services in my 87 years. I've never heard anything like that. You have a gift." Sarah felt embarrassed. "I just played from my heart, like Mrs. Rodriguez taught her students to do." The woman with gray hair came forward next. "You didn't just play that song," she said. "You told a story with it, about loss and finding hope again, about how beautiful things can come from broken places." More people gathered around the piano. Each person wanted to thank Sarah, to tell her how the music had touched them, how it had helped them remember their own experiences with Mrs. Rodriguez. A man in his 40s stepped forward. "Mrs. Rodriguez was my teacher when I was 8 years old," he said. "My family had no money for lessons, but she taught me anyway. Tonight, listening to you play, I remembered why I fell in love with music. I haven't played piano in years, but I'm going to start again." Sarah felt overwhelmed by these responses. She had only intended to play one simple song. She had no idea that her music would affect people so deeply, but then she remembered Mrs. Rodriguez's story. How the woman had spent 47 years believing that music could change lives. Maybe what had happened tonight was proof that she was right. Maria spoke to the crowd. "Everyone, I want you to meet Sarah. She works here at the community center. When our regular pianist got sick, she volunteered to help us, even though she hasn't played in public for many years." People nodded and murmured appreciatively. They understood how much courage it had taken for Sarah to say yes. "I have a question." For Sarah, Maria continued, she turned to face her directly. "My grandmother left behind 12 piano students, children who were taking lessons with her when she died. Their families can't afford to pay a new teacher." Sarah felt her heart start beating faster. She sensed what was coming. "Would you consider teaching them?" Maria asked. "I know it's a big request, but after tonight, I think you understand what music meant to my grandmother and what it could mean to these children." Sarah looked around at all the faces watching her. These people believed in her now. They had heard something in her playing, that she was just beginning to recognize herself. She thought about the 12 children who had lost their teacher. Children who might think their music lessons were over forever. Children who might believe they weren't important enough to deserve music in their lives. Sarah remembered being that child herself, watching her piano being carried away, thinking her musical dreams were finished. "I don't know if I'm good enough," Sarah said honestly. "I'm not formally trained like Mrs. Rodriguez was." An older woman in the back of the crowd spoke up. "Elena wasn't formally trained either when she started. She learned by doing, by caring, by believing that every child deserves music." The man, who had stopped playing piano years ago, stepped forward again. "I'll help you," he said. "I'm a music teacher now in another town, but I can come on weekends. We can work together." Other people began offering to help too. Someone offered to donate sheet music. Another person said they could help repair instruments. A woman said she could provide transportation for children whose families didn't have cars. Sarah felt amazed by this outpouring of support. These people didn't just want Mrs. Rodriguez's work to continue, they wanted to be part of continuing it. The children need more than just technique, Maria said. They need someone who understands that music is about heart, someone who can help them find their own voices. After tonight, I know you're that person. Sarah looked at the piano where she had just rediscovered her own voice. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's 47 years of service. About second chances and unexpected opportunities. She thought about the scared cleaning woman who had almost said no to playing one simple song. And about the musician she was rediscovering herself to be. Yes, Sarah said quietly. Then louder, yes, I'll teach them. The room erupted in quiet applause. People were smiling and crying at the same time. It felt like witnessing the beginning of something beautiful. As the memorial service ended and people began to leave, many stopped to speak with Sarah again. They shared their phone numbers. They told her about the children who needed lessons. They welcomed her into Mrs. Rodriguez's extended family. Sarah stayed at the piano until the room was almost empty. She played Amazing Grace one more time, very softly. But now it felt different. Not like an ending, but like a beginning. Mrs. Johnson approached her as she was getting ready to leave. Sarah, I hope you know what happened here tonight. You didn't just play a song, you continued a legacy? Sarah nodded. She was beginning to understand that this evening had changed not just her own life, but the lives of children she hadn't even met yet. As she walked home through the quiet streets, Sarah thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's belief that music never really dies. It lives on in the people who carry it forward. Tonight, Sarah had become one of those people. She had found her voice again, and she would help others find theirs too. The circle of music and love would continue just as Mrs. Rodriguez had always believed it would.